Jus Punjabi?
Back in those days in the 90s, especially in New York, there was no even an Indian channel that was connecting the community. They would pay money anytime there was an event. Ke saadi tusi gurbani dikha do, saade tusi kirtan dikha do. So my mom was kind of that liaison. Eventually a time came that she was like, this is really not the right way. Punjabiyan da apna kuch hona chahiye. Things really started rolling, but it wasn't until 2007 that Jus Punjabi was launched on air.
This channel used to come in India also?
We did try to launch in India on cable, but as you can imagine, we enjoy a certain freedom being based here in the United States that channels over there don't, right? Today, people talk about media. It's literally your life can be threatened if you decide to speak up against the powers in place.
There was no channel out there to cover any immigrant stories. Everything was going on with no Indian media.
No channel from India, your Sony Z Star, all of their broadcasting and their focus and they're talking and thinking about Indian issues. This issue is not even on their radar because they're not here. You have to physically be here. We need equal effort on the mainstream side, so we are recognized that yes, these people exist.
Hello Aashmeeta, Sat Shri Akal, and welcome to Miles to Million Punjabi.
Sat Shri Akal, hello, good to be here, Karan. Thank you for having me.
So how's Saturday morning? How's everything going?
It's a beautiful morning and I'm at home today, which is always nice to be home on the weekends, some time with the family. So yeah, so far so good.
I think last time when we talked on the phone, you were just coming from Canada, right? Like I remember you told that you were setting up studio, just studio over there.
Yes, yes. So we the studio is all up and running and it's in the Toronto area, Mississauga to be exact, and our team is there. They're
Perfect.
very active and kind of relating to a little bit of what you do, the radio drive time kind of podcast community there is flourishing because people are on the road so much. So
Mm-hmm.
very different from the US, at least the East Coast in the US, Northeast. We have different media consumption habits, but we love Canada because the Punjabi Sikh community there, especially, it's so authentic. I mean, the students are literally creating a mini Punjab there,
Mm-hmm.
and it's different in the US because in the US there's this culture of assimilation. You come here and much like our elders always say, ਸਾਡੇ ਬਜ਼ੁਰਗ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕਿ ਇੱਥੇ ਆ ਕੇ ਬੱਚੇ Americanized ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ, ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ western ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ, right? But in Canada it's almost like that's accepted, right? To keep and preserve your culture, and the Canadian system kind of gives you an opportunity to preserve your culture. So it's a little bit of a different experience, but we're thoroughly enjoying it.
Coming back to just Punjabi, you told me a lovely story about it. So before even giving anything, any clue to the audience, I would like you to tell our audience how you started or how the CEO started Just Punjabi.
Oh my gosh, it's such a I hope, right, that it's an inspiring story, especially for a lot of the younger generation that sometimes struggle to find their way in the face of obstacles and challenges. So full disclaimer here, I obviously did not start the channel, but I have been obviously very intimately involved for a long, long time. The story starts back in the early 2000s. A little bit further back than that, I'll go just for the sake of, giving you the full picture. So my mom, Penikar Sandhu, lifelong journalist. Both my parents used to cover Parliament back in India in the 90s in New Delhi. So that's where we lived, when I was a little girl. Their newspaper that they used to write for assigned both of them to move to New York City to cover the United Nations. And I was only like 2.5 half at the time. So obviously they brought me with them. And that's when I say I'm a lifelong New Yorker. So they were, settled in New York City. Once I entered the school system, there was really no going back, which, you have to do in the US. You can't have a young child not be in the school system.
Right.
So my mom was always in the media, transitioned to broadcast media from print. And back in those days in the 90s, especially in New York or in the United States or North America for that matter, there was no, forget Punjabi channel, right? Punjabi channels didn't exist. Even your Z Alpha, your PTC, like all of these came much, much later, right? There was no even an Indian channel that was, connecting the community with their roots, with their news from back home, with their culture. There was one locally here in New York that my parents were associated with. And on this Hindi Indian channel, the local Punjabi community here in New York City, like Richmond Hill Gurdwara, for example, 118, right?
Mm-hmm.
They would pay money anytime Ragi Jathe came, anytime there was an event. I mean, egregious amounts of money, right? Even for back in those days, late 90s, I'm talking about. कि साडी तुसी गुरबानी दिखा दो, साडे तुसी कीर्तन दिखा दो, समागम दिखा दो, right? ਇਹਦੀ ad चला दो. And of course, we were very connected to that community. That's the Gurdwara I grew up going to, 118. And so my mom was kind of that liaison, right? She
Mm-hmm.
facilitated कि गुरुद्वारे दी सारे programs channel te दिखाए जान. And eventually a time came that she was like, this is really not the right way. Like ਪੰਜਾਬੀਆਂ ਦਾ ਆਪਣਾ ਕੁਝ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ, ਸਾਡਾ ਆਪਣਾ ਪਲੇਟਫਾਰਮ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਤੋਂ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਕਿਉਂ ਪੁੱਛਣ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪਲੀਜ਼ ਸਾਡੀ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਦਿਖਾ ਦਿਓ, right? So she started putting this idea together to have a Punjabi specific channel. And once again, young brown female in a very male dominated white world. I mean, it still is, right? I would
Mm-hmm.
like to say that things have improved, and they have, but back then it was very different. And so she would go to these cable operators, right? So, like at the time, it was Time Warner Cable here in New York City locally. And she went to this one meeting, and the executive, typical white older man, he says to her, she does her pitch, and he says, "Oh, so you want to open up a TV channel for taxi drivers?" Right?
Mm.
Because this is like 2004, 2005. And in New York City, a Punjabi person, their identity, a Sikh identity, was associated with a taxi driver or a gas station owner. Indians in general were associated with, Dunkin' Donuts and grocery marts, convenience stores, 7-Elevens, right? So it was a very like, we were in this bucket, right? And her response, which I love telling people this story because it's so powerful, she said, "Yeah, I mean, there's taxi drivers, but they're also doctors and lawyers and businessmen and engineers and professionals all across the board. And they deserve to have a platform of their own, just like anybody else. You're missing out by not catering to this community because they have a lot to say." And so one thing led to another. 2005, things really started rolling, but it wasn't until 2007 that Jus Punjabi was launched on air. So it took a while. And once it was on air, I mean, it was on cable, Time Warner Cable, and satellite, Dish Network. And at the time when Jus Punjabi was launched, once again, no Punjabi channel, not even in India. PTC was launched later that year. I think Z Alpha existed, but it was just in India. So genuinely, when we say that we are the first, American Punjabi or North American Punjabi channel, because at the time, I mean, the market didn't even exist, right? It was like creating a whole new, business opportunity that previously just didn't exist. And it's so funny because even our community sometimes, and we were very close to the community here in New York. It's very, very robust, very thriving, and it was back
Absolutely.
then too. And a lot of times people would say to my mom, I mean, I was there for it all. Like I grew up with this, right? So they would say, कि, "Oh, Punjabi channel कौन वेखेगा कि ਅਸੀਂ ਤਾਂ अपने सीरियल देखदे ਆ ਜਾਂ golden temple ਤੋਂ ਜੋ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਆਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਵੇਖਣੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਜਾਂ this and that ਕਿ ਤੇਰਾ channel ਕੌਣ ਵੇਖੇਗਾ?"
Mm.
And she was like, "No, there's people here that have things to say, and there's news that they're not getting, that's what I'm going to provide." And so our channel didn't have any movies, Didn't have any serial. We still don't have that. We focus more on community based programming, events, and talking about things that are happening to the community, and then also informing them, which is what I do now, about things that affect the community, right? So when I
Mm,
talk about American politics or the elections or social issues that are affecting the younger generation, right? With a lens of Punjabi, with a lens of Sikh diaspora. They may be American stories, but these are things that affect our community and our next generation. And so that's kind of how the channel started and how the content developed. We like to think that, jo sade buzurg hege, they are our most heartfelt, dedicated, loyal viewers, because they were the first ones to realize that no one at the time was having these kind of conversations, and
mm-hmm.
they took a big part in joining those conversations. We had a lot of live shows and things like that. But today, I like to think that a lot of younger people, like, your husband as well, he's Hirsch is such a fantastic voice when it comes to crypto and, financial matters.
Right.
He's such a young but intelligent speaker on these matters
Mm-hmm.
that, bringing someone like him on my program, I feel like I'm connecting a new generation of Punjabi Sikh voices as well. So I like to think we're trying to, stay well rounded, but that's the background.
I would like to ask, like, I know that your mom wanted to cover, diaspora stories, right? What would you think, like, back of her head, like, what was going on that, like, that she's like, okay, like, like the Punjabi audience needs to get, like, heard. Their stories needs to be get heard by people all across. And this channel used to come in India also, or just in US.
So when we first launched, it was local in New York City, tri-state area, and then we grew nationwide once we were on Dish Network, which was a few months later, and then we did go international on like IPTV and streaming services, in Canada, things like that. We did try to launch in India on cable, but as you can imagine, being a Punjabi channel talking about Punjab politics specifically, we enjoy a certain freedom being based here in the United States that channels over there don't, right? Today, people talk about media. Today, people realize what's happened in India with the media, that is not free and fair and unbiased, because they've been bought out, because those people don't have a choice, right? If you're a media entity in India, it's literally your life can be threatened if you decide to speak up against the powers in place, right? But back then in the 2000s and 2010s, it was the same in Punjab.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you spoke up against the ruling party, they would shut your channel off. They would just go to your studio and turn your electricity off. You weren't broadcasting, right? So, a couple of times we did try to launch there on cable, on Fastway, things like that. And we didn't really get anywhere. And we thought, you know what? Our stories, our audience, our content
Wow.
isn't for the Indian based community. It's for the community living outside of India, right? And what ended up happening was the stories specifically that my mom Penny G wanted to tell were things that were happening to folks here, right? So I'll give you an example. A lot of people in those days, they will come to the United States. They, would start getting, involved in the working world here, right? What is a immigrant story? And it's different today. Today looks a little different, especially in the US, than it did back then, like 15 years ago. Back then, it was you migrated with your family. Mom and dad both work because you need to, right? To pay the bills, to have a stable life. Like, things are very different in the US than they are in India. You don't have a safai wali, you don't have a kapde wali, you don't have this, you don't have that.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have a joint family that you're living, that people are taking care of the kids. So mom and dad would both go to work. The kids are at home. unsupervised. They're being exposed to a completely radically different culture. And the biggest pain point was ਸਾਡੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਤੋਂ ਵਿਛੜ ਰਹੇ ਹੈ, ਸਾਡੇ ਬੱਚੇ culture ਨੂੰ reject ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹੈ, ਬੱਚੇ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ Americanized ਹੋ ਰਹੇ ਹੈ, right? So this was such a issue that kept coming up, that oh ਬੱਚੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਾਂਦੇ, ਬੱਚੇ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਤੋਂ ਦੂਰ ਹੋ ਰਹੇ ਹੈ, things like that. And people would talk about it amongst themselves, but there was no like collective discussion. There was no, you know, focusing on solutions like, well, what can we do, right? How do we rectify this? And so, no channel from India, your Sony Z Star, even your PTC, that all of their broadcasting and their focus and their leadership is sitting in India. They're talking and thinking about Indian issues. They're not covering that this issue is not even on their radar,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because they're not here. You have to physically be here. And so our teams, because, my parents had a similar story. I was lucky that I never was with a babysitter. After school, my mom would pick me up. I would come to the office with her, or I would go out into the fields with her. So, like, I was very fortunate in that way. And I think that's why when I say, like, I've kind of grown up with the media, I genuinely have, right? But other people didn't have that luxury. Like, if you have two kids or you have young kids or three kids, after school, they're coming home and they're home by themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to hope and pray to God that they'll be okay and that they're going to do the right thing, because you have to go and work, right? So that's just one example. I mean, there was a million examples like that, right? How do you assimilate so you can have a good life here but still not lose your culture, apne pehchan nu tusi na bhullo, right? Things like that. So I mean, there was a million topics that at the time were so important to discuss. There was a lot of stuff, like we had a couple of live shows that were social issues
Mm-hmm.
based. So, like, once again, I have to preface this with, things are very different now, and our community has evolved so much.
And I think your mom actually like paved Punjabi content creation. Like I would say,
Wow.
like
Thank you.
like there was no channel out there like to cover any immigrant stories, and especially no content creation at that point. Everything. If I'm not wrong, like everything was going on with like no Indian media, and no one, like
Mm-hmm.
you said, no one was here to cover like immigration stories. And she kind of like paved the way of what the lifestyles are for immigration out here. And I would like to ask, how did your mom change your life? Did you ever
Oh, that's
thought कि मैं media which आ रही हैं because of like my mother, like from passion, or like okay, this is the lifestyle I'm exposed to and I have to go through this?
So I always am very honest about this answer. I mean, the first part of your question, how did she change my life? I mean, I think anyone that is blessed or fortunate enough to have good parents, especially a good strong mother figure, will say that. I mean, that's such a loaded question, right? There's no one answer. I'm still beholden to the changes in my life because of who she is as a person. We're very much still doing what we're doing, right? Just Punjabi and Just TV, all the other networks, and all of that. But the second part of your question, I can probably actually answer more succinctly, which is that, and I tell people this all the time when they ask me how I got involved, right? When I was in school, my interest was in politics, American politics. And I'm going to date myself here, but when I entered college, it was 2008, right? So the fall of 2008. So in the United States, 2008 was a very big year because President Obama became president, right? And for me going into college at the time, it was this revolutionary sense that, oh my God, this country with its history, if an African American man can become president, anything is possible, right? Like there was so much hope and inspiration. I mean, his whole campaign was literally hope, right? That someone like me, there can be a place for me in government and as a change maker. And the more I got involved into politics, I realized like that really wasn't for me. That I don't think I was a political kind of cut out for that life, a political person, but I loved the topic. And so my undergrad I did in political science and journalism because I thought, well, if I can't be a politician because it seems like they have to change their colors a lot, and
Mm.
I'm very much like I am who I am, right? Then maybe I can be someone who talks about these politicians and holds them to account, right? That yesterday you said this, today you're saying that, you promised this, but you're doing that, that kind of thing, right? And so I kind of found my way into that world during college. And of course, with the guidance of my mom, she never pressured me, कि, oh, tu family business nu join kar, tu journalism which tu eh kar, tu oh kar. She was very much like, go figure it out,
Mhm.
do it. Like, she was never like, oh, tu doctor, lawyer, engineer banna hai, ya tu jo main kar rahi hu wahi karna hai, right? Which is one of those things that we used to cover a lot in our content, that oh, ਸਾਡੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਜੋ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਕਰਵਾਉਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਉਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ, right? ਸਾਡੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਉਸ direction ਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਾਏ, that kind of thing. But she was very she was great like that. And my dad passed away, right, when I was pretty young, and so she did all this by herself, the channel and raising me. And so I think that's important to mention for women, because a lot of women, even if their husbands are in the picture, end up being the primary caregivers for children in the family, right? And so I think we as a society have to recognize that more and say, wow, that in itself is an accomplishment, right?
Absolutely.
People just expect that, oh, hota toda bacha hai, you have to raise your kid, right? But raising a child is adding to the future of society, right? You raise a good kid, you're making society a better place for tomorrow.
Absolutely.
You don't, and you're adding to the negative side, right?
Mhm.
So I always saw her working hard, and I have to say, where there's good, there is bad. A lot of times I saw how this was a very thankless job, like the comment I just told you about, "Tid nanga karke dikhana wali gal," right? That the community would look at her and say, "Ki oh, ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੱਗਦੀ, ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਬਾਲ ਕਟੇ ਹੋਏ ਹੈ, ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਪੈਂਟਾ ਪਾਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ, ਇਹ ਕੀ ਸਿੱਖ ਚੈਨਲ ਚਲਾਉਗੀ, ਇਹ ਕੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਲਈ ਕਰ ਲੂਗੀ," right? I would see things like that, and like, it never phased her. She was like, listen, I gotta do what I gotta do. I'm gonna keep doing it no matter what people think, right? And she's still very much like that. But I would see it as a young adult and I'd be like, why are you doing this? Like, this is a thankless job. Like, people start businesses to become rich, to become famous, to have stability. And this business, it offered respect, but that was about it. Like, no one becomes rich by running a local news organization, right? In a very niche community. And so I did not want to go into this line of work, especially did not want to work at Jus. And she was like, that's fine, that's your decision. And so, I did my undergrad. I went to grad school. I did my master's, and I ended up in corporate marketing. And I was living in Austin for a few years, and I loved it. I was really good at my job, just digital marketing stuff, and it was all the rage back then. This is like mid 2010s, and like I said, I was really good at it, like social media, SEO, all that stuff. But I was kind of bored, right? Like, I like the 9 to 5 has its positives, but I had seen this kind of childhood and young adulthood, that was so exciting. And like every day there's something going on. Like every day there was something with the community, right? That like we were like the first on the scene to cover it. I mean, that's a very different lifestyle than, Monday to Friday. You go to the office, you do your emails, you come back, and that's it, right? And um, at some point, my husband and I, we decided to move back to New York, and I fully joined the business. And I thought at that point too, like, I'm stupid. Like, my mom has built this thing. I would be foolish if I didn't join her and help her bring it to the next level. Like, why am I letting her do this by herself? Like,
Mm.
And I think that was probably the best case scenario, because it, instead of her forcing me to do it, maybe I wouldn't have, been so engaged. But the fact that I went out, did my own thing, and then found my own way back, I think really had a different impact on me. Like, I was way more committed in that sense. And so, for the last almost 10 years, I've been fully at Just, doing whatever is needed, right? Like I have a title and I have a main job that I do. But when it's a family business, when it's a privately owned company like this, like your job is never just what's in your title, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like everything.
You
So
gotta wear many hats.
I wear many hats. Yep. Yep.
Going back to what you said, covering stories as a female content creators, not being a proper, in a sick attire, like your mom get like bashed. I kind of someone get relates to it because when I started my Punjabi channel, like my goal was with this channel is to cover like the sick Punjabi content. When I was doing my YouTube, I was like, "There's everyone is doing like everything in the world with any podcast, but there's like very less Punjabi YouTube channels which are covering stories for like Punjabi audience, what they have achieved in their lives." Um, but it's just kind of like people. I feel like need to have like a broad perspective. They just when they see like a Punjabi content, they will only see the identity of a Sikh first, and then they will like, okay, then we're gonna talk about it. So how can we like change this?
I mean, that's a fantastic question, right? And I don't think there's an easy answer. I'll try my best. I apologize in advance if I offend anybody. See, I don't think that, on one hand, I don't think we should change it, right? And I say that because even though mere baal kate hoye hai, right? Even though मैं अमृत नहीं छकिया, but मैं सिक्खी नाल जुड़ी हुई I was raised as a Sikh. I'm a practicing Sikh. My mom was a Sikh, practicing Sikh. We don't look like it. I think if you go back to the philosophy of Sikhi, ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਗੁਰੂ ਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ,
Mm-hmm.
ਰਾਈਟ, ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਸਿੱਖ ਦੀ ਪਹਿਚਾਨ ਇਦਾਂ ਦੀ ਹੋਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਦੂਰੋਂ ਕੋਈ ਉਹ ਸਿੱਖ ਸਰੂਪ ਵੇਖੇ ਐਂਡ ਕਹੇ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਇੰਡੀਵਿਜੂਅਲ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਪ੍ਰੋਟੈਕਟ ਕਰ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ, ਇਹ ਇੰਡੀਵਿਜੂਅਲ ਦੇ ਇਹ ਕਿਰਦਾਰ ਹਨ, ਇਹ ਮੋਰਲਸ ਵੈਲਿਊਜ਼, ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸੋਚ ਹੈਗੀ, ਰਾਈਟ? And your physical identity, unfortunately, is the easiest way someone, the first thing that they judge about you, right? And so for a Sikh, the easiest way that someone can tell you this is what I believe in is by having their case, is by wearing the pug, by showing the signs of their Sikhi in an outward manner, right? So I get how important that is. And ਜਦੋਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਬਜ਼ੁਰਗ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਤੂੰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜਾਂ ਕੌਰ ਆਪਣੇ ਨਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਲਾਇਆ ਕਰ, ਹੈ ਨਾ, ਤੂੰ ਇਹ ਕਰ ਉਹ ਕਰ, I take that to heart, right? I can't always implement it, but I do appreciate their sentiment because I get where they're coming from and how important that is for us.
Mm-hmm.
Sikhs are a minority in a minority, right? But you notice now, especially in these Western countries, ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ ਇੰਨੀ ਛੋਟੀ ਗਿਣਤੀ ਹੋਣ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਵਜੂਦ ਇੰਨੀ ਵੱਡੀ presence ਹੈਗੀ, right? Like
Mm.
in Canada, in the UK, Sikhs are revered, right? We went from being recognized as taxi drivers and gas station pump people to doctors, like, oh, Dr. Singh, right? Like, this person is educated. This person is someone who always gives out free food. They're charitable. They're kind, right? And like, part of that is the physical identity. But on the other hand, I will give a double answer that yes, the way we can change it is that our actions have to be louder than the identity, even, right? So an example of that is COVID is a perfect thing here, where during COVID all six did these huge magnanimous acts of seva, ਭਾਵੇਂ ਉਹ ਲੰਗਰ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਹੋਏ, PPE ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਹੋਏ, oxygen tanks ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ, ਇਹਦੀ ਉਹਦੀ ਜੋ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ, right?
Mm-hmm.
ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਨੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਸੇਵਾਵਾਂ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ. More than half of them don't look sick, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the world recognized that here is this community that is so selfless and giving, right? And in that sense, ਸਾਡੀ ਜੋ ਪਹਿਚਾਨ ਵੀ ਹੈਗੀ, ਸਾਡੀ ਜੋ ਫਿਜ਼ੀਕਲ ਕੈਰੈਕਟਰਿਸਟਿਕਸ ਹੈਗੇ, ਉਹ ਵੀ ਓਵਰਸ਼ੈਡੋਡ ਹੋਏ ਇੱਕ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਕਲੈਕਟਿਵ ਐਕਸ਼ਨ ਤੋਂ, right? So, how can we overcome when people say, oh, you have to look like a Sikh? You overcome that by acting like a Sikh. You don't have to be someone that goes to the gurdwara every day, or you do, Panjbaniya the part, yeah, this or that. But you have to know what it means to be a Sikh, and you have to live that way. And when someone looks at you and they say, wow, like that's amazing what you're doing, and you say, well, I'm a Sikh, that's what I do,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that is even more powerful. Like, no one can deny that your physical look will always dictate how people first perceive you, but that's only one impression, right? Your
Right.
first physical impression is just one moment. After that, it's your actions, how you carry yourself, that people judge you on, they judge your entire community on, right? When people look at people like me and you, they may think we're Indian, they may think we're Pakistani, they may think we're Latino, right? But it's only when we say, no, 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 this is my name, I'm Punjabi, I'm Sikh, this is what I believe in, that they're like, oh, this is who you are, right? So that physical will always be there, but I do think we can overcome that if you're in a situation that you need to, because you don't have those physical characteristics, by living and acting like a Sikh should.
Wow, beautifully presented. Beautifully. It did change my mind because um I was always get kind of disheartened, like when people see my content, would they only see like on my stories, they would only see, okay, like they're not doing by the books non-sick things, and then they would only judge me. I'm like, bro, I'm like producing content for our community to learn much more than we've been told in books. I think ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਕੰਟੈਂਟ ਕ੍ਰੀਏਸ਼ਨ ਬਾਰੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਸਾਡੇ ਜ਼ਹਿਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੋਸਟਲੀ ਸਿਰਫ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਦੇ ਰਿਲੇਟਡ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ, mostly that's
Mm.
what I've seen, right? um
Hmm.
what do you think the future of Punjabi content creation like lies in, or how we can like change that, what more stories or things we can cover, so that like our outreach reaches like international level of content.
Um, I mean, the easiest way I think is mainstream, but I don't think that's the only way, right? And what I mean by that is, see, Punjabi content creation is no different than content creation in general, right? The idea is that our community, our kids, should have the same opportunities, the same seat at the table, so to speak, that any other community does, right? So in the United States, and I'll just give you an example from mainstream media that I observe, right? In the United States, every mainstream network will have obviously your white anchors, your male and female anchors. They'll have your African American anchors. They'll have your Latino anchors. They've increasingly started to have Asian, like Oriental Asian, your Chinese, Korean, Japanese looking anchors, the faces, right? On mainstream networks. It's very, very recent, and it's very still in small numbers, that you've started to see brown faces, clearly South Asian anchors. And even in that, there is an even smaller, like, point percentage of that maybe they're Punjabi. Now, this is more on the American side. If you obviously look at the BBC or the UK or Canada, it's very different. They're way ahead of us,
Mm-hmm.
right? But in terms of mainstream content creation, the way that we get to the next level is to have more faces, more names that are Singh and Kaur be in the mainstream, right? But beyond that, if someone, a Punjabi, there's a fantastic journalist at CNN, Harmeet Kaur, right? She is in a mainstream world, right? She's writing and working for CNN, and her name says Harmeet Kaur. People who know that Kaur means she's associated with this community, right? But on CNN, she's writing about stuff that CNN is dictating the terms, right? Here and there, she'll write about things that affect our community, very rarely, as is the directive that she's given. Like, but ultimately, she's writing what this mainstream channel is telling her to write about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So while we do need that mainstream presence For us to tell our stories, we have to create our own space, right? So someone like you said, I wanted to do this podcast. This is a space that I thought maybe there was a void, in this area or in this topic, and you decided to go out and do it. And honestly, we need more of that, right? Like today, considering how the media landscape is, like when I went to school for journalism, it was, print or broadcast or radio, right? It was a news item is the who, what, where, when, why, minimum 2 to 3 sources that verify what facts you're presenting, and that's it. News was facts, it was not opinion, right? The op-eds were for opinions, and they were clearly labeled that this is an opinion editorial
Mm.
versus this is the news, right? Today, there is no parameter for journalism or news or fact versus opinion. I mean, there's a lot of issues that creates, but in terms of content creation, that also creates a million opportunities. You don't need to be hired by CNN to have a huge voice or impact people, right? Platforms like YouTube, Insta, TikTok have given people a chance to amplify their voices if they have something important to say and they know how to connect with people to say it, right?
Hmm.
And so when it comes to Punjabi content creation, we need to do that more. We more people need to do what you're doing, which is, we need equal effort on the mainstream side. So we are recognized that, yes, these people exist, right? And they can, be in the White House reporting on what's happening or be on Capitol Hill. But they can also be a viral TikToker talking about, I think Nuv the poet, right? Talking about, the challenges of having case, of having a turban, of being a Sikh, right? So like I think we need both. But for people that are like, oh, what more needs to be done? Like to your point, to your question, just more people like you. More people need to be like, I think that there is a void here. And instead of waiting for someone to fill it, because I can, I'm just gonna do it myself. Like there is no money out of your pocket to start a podcast
Hmm.
or to start a YouTube channel. Obviously, as things grow, you want to spend time and resources to hone that. But it's not like you have to go and physically build a studio or rent a space or hire staff. Like today's technology gives us so much that we can do ourselves, right? And it's such a great way to connect with people. I mean, I grew up in the age of internet, and even I'm sometimes dumbfounded that it's so easy to reach millions of people in an instant, if you really want to. So yeah.
It's very exciting to see that our female content creators are coming forward. But do you think, like, not even talking about the stats, right? But what do you think the female content creation, like, are how many are there, or how much more we need? Like, what does the stat says in that?
I mean, I have seen, like, I don't have hard numbers off the top of my head, but I have seen that there is certainly an increase in female content creators over the last, I would say, few years. But once again, like more is better,
Mm-hmm.
right? In this situation, 100% we need more, right? Even if, let's say, just for the sake of, putting a number out there, say there's 100, really well put together female content creators, non mainstream out there today, right? We need 100,000, right? We need way more because at the end of the day, any community is only as successful or recognized as it is diverse, right? So, Sikh storytelling, especially from the female perspective, can't just be limited to the 4 or 5 subjects that you often see, right? Oh, the challenges of being a Sikh woman in a professional field, the challenges of maintaining your Sikhi and, raising a family in a Western, like it needs to be more diverse. We need to be talking about more like topics that affect our community. And that's not going to happen until you have more people talking about it, because everyone is living some experience that is unique to them,
Mm-hmm.
right? But the beauty of it is, if they're able to communicate that, chances are there's other people living that experience. And then the larger impact, or the larger effect of that, is really people start to recognize us as not very different from them, right? So a sick mom maybe going through something because she is particularly sick, and she's maybe raising two young boys that have to wear patka and they're getting bullied at school, and that's her particular challenge and her experience, right? But if she talks about that, chances are even a non-sick mom that may have children that are a little different, that are getting bullied in school, could learn something from that, right? But it only happens when you put yourself out there and you share that experience. Like, it takes fearlessness, which I'm proud to say I think Sikh women are some of the most fearless, right? But you do have to be vulnerable and
Mm-hmm.
say, well, this happened to me and it was, uncomfortable, or this or that, and share it. Because not only does that uplift our community, it gives our community resources, but it also connects us to other communities,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we have, throughout the world, like, even the most different people have more things in common than they do that are different, right? It's just a matter of expressing them and recognizing that, yeah, there's more things that we share than that set us apart, right? And I mean, ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਅਸੀਂ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਕਰਨੇ ਹਾਂ, we Sikh people specifically, I don't know, I'm not a theologian, but I know that Sikhi is one of the unique religions that in the ardas we say always sarbat da pala, right? ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਨਾ ਕਿ ਸਿਰਫ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਲਈ, ਨਾ ਆਪਣੇ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਲਈ, ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਲਈ, right? But if we don't tell people that, how are they going to know that this is what Sikh people do? That, yeah, that they pray for world peace, basically, right? And so I think we need more, always.
Why is there like shortage like for female content creators?
Um, Very easy question. I know, because I recently started my family. Um, there is a phenomenon. It's not a phenomenon. It's just more of a recently recognized thing, but it's been happening for centuries. It's called the second shift, right? So women in particular, especially today, we're seeing the highest rates of education amongst women, the highest rates of professional acumen. Right, women are working more, and they're climbing higher and higher in the professional ladder. But guess what? A woman is still the primary caregiver at home. And even if you have a great partner, your husband helps with the household duties and cooks and takes care of the kids and all of that, chances are there is an additional expectation from the woman herself. I'm very lucky. My husband is amazing and he helps so, so much, and I wouldn't be able to do half the things I do without his support, with our little kiddo. But at the end of the day, there are certain things that only I can do for our child, or
Mm-hmm.
only I will do in the house, even though he very much can and he has no problem doing them. But that's just, I know I have to do that stuff, right? And that's on me. And so we still, unfortunately, and I don't know if there's an answer or a timeline on when things change, we still live in a society that women are expected, in addition to going to school, getting a job, contributing to the household income, they're still expected to carry more of the burden when it comes to your families, your household stuff, maintaining that household, right? When I was growing up, like, my mother would always say, oh, orta ਘਰ ਨੂੰ ਸਾਂਭਦੀਆਂ, right?
Mm.
ਕਿ no matter ਕਿੰਨਾ ਚੰਗਾ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹਸਬੈਂਡ ਹੋਵੇ, ਇੱਕ ਔਰਤ ਦੀ ਡਿਊਟੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਘਰ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਂਭੋ, ਸਾਫ਼ ਰੱਖੋ, ਹੈ ਨਾ? ਉਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਸਾਂਝ ਰੱਖੋ, ਪਿਆਰ ਰੱਖੋ, ਸ਼ਾਂਤੀ ਰੱਖੋ, these kind of things, right? And once again, like, that may be an older mindset, but our society hasn't really largely evolved past that, right? So content creation, like any other field, women are going to always be set back because we're also doing this entire other job, like a second, sometimes third shift. I mean, we're very much still like as progressive as the society is, or we like to think we are, especially in like US, Canada. We haven't overcome that, not at all. So, yeah.
We need an AI robot just for women in our lives to do most of the things so
I
that we can
know.
focus on our things.
Exactly. No, I agree. I'm sure we'll get there soon.
Yeah, AI is also a hot topic these days. No, but I think you're right. Like, I think the only way we can do it is, the more you do, like, the more you come out. Yeah, you get supportive husbands, supportive partners. But like, just focus on yourself. I think one thing that I've realized in our society is women don't focus on themselves. They don't focus on their happiness. So the only way to change is not feel guilty of doing things that you like to do and just do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, today we can say, oh, it's self-love or self-care or focusing on yourself, right? But not too long ago, people just call that selfish.
Mm,
ਕਿ ਉਹ ਇਹ ਜਨਾਨੀ ਨੂੰ ਵੇਖੋ ਬੱਚੇ ਕਰੇ ਦੇ ਰੋ ਰਹੇ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਇਹ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਸਹੇਲੀਆਂ ਨਾਲ ਲੰਚ ਕਰ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ like very demeaning ways, right? ਕਿ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਕੀ ਇੰਨਾ ਸ਼ੌਕ ਹੋਇਆ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਨ ਦਾ ਇਹਦੇ ਤਾਂ ਬੱਚੇ ਰੁੱਲ ਰਹੇ ਹੈ, right?
mm,
ਘਰ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਂਭ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਕਦੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ so not too long ago that behavior was just considered selfish. It was looked down upon, and I hate to say that there's a lot of people that still think of it like that, right? And it's not easy to break out from that mentality. If enough people tell you that you're a certain way, that you're being selfish, that you're this, that you're that, and it's negative reinforcement, you believe it. No matter how strong you are mentally, you start to believe them, especially when it's coming from your friends, your family, the people that you see at the gurdwara, things like that. When people reinforce those negative beliefs, you're like, well, maybe I should quit my job. Maybe I shouldn't try for that promotion because it would take time away from my kids. Maybe I shouldn't do this extracurricular thing like start a podcast because then how am I going to keep the house clean, right? Like whatever the XYZ is, but it's as much our duty as it is the people around us to say that, oh, you want to do this extra thing? We support you. Try it out. We're here for you, right? Like I think it has to come from the people around us just as much.